We are here in the vault, the Carlton archive, surrounded by Carlton history, which is an opportune time and place for us to discuss some of the great recruiting coups of all time of the Carlton Football Club with a man who probably knows better than most how these great players came to Princes Park. Shane, when we think of you and your time as a recruiter at Carlton, invariably the name Stephen Kernahan is the first that comes to mind. Can you tell the story about Stephen Kernahan's recruitment to the club and your role in his recruiting?
Thanks, Tone. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty special player that we've got to Carlton. Look, it really started when I first arrived in '79, and I can remember Wes Lofts telling me that you've got to find a Royce Hart, the next Royce Hart. And I said, well, that's a pretty big task, that, because he was a pretty special player, Royce. So I can remember my first, how lucky I was I went to Tasmania, the under-18s, called it the Tilt Cup in those days, and to watch footy. And I thought, gosh, how good's this? And so, that was amazing. And then they had the under-16s, I think it was in those days, might have under-15s. I'd have to, correct myself if I'm wrong there. But they had the state titles there for them. And anyway, I was watching South Australia play, and this amazing young skinny fella really took my eye. And I can remember going back to the club when the carnival finished and seeing Wes Lofts and said, look, I found the next Royce Hart. And he said, Wes was, you're kidding, you're kidding us. And I said, no, I'm telling you, I reckon we found the next Royce Hart. I said, the only problem is his father is the general manager of Glenelg Footy Club, and the player was Stephen Kernahan, of course, and South Australians hate Victorians. And in fact, I got, in those days, early days, if you went into a room in South Australia, they quickly kicked you out if they knew who you were and from what club. But so that's the first time I set eyes on Sticks, and we then sort of proceeded to chip away and try to get him to the club.
So you've mentioned Stephen's father, Harry Kernahan, who was a big figure in his own right in South Australian football. So presumably to get to Stephen, you had to deal with Harry.
Yep.
How was that experience?
To be fair, it was pretty good, to be honest. Like, I was a bit nervous and, sort of knew it, all this sort of side of things. And but I can remember when it sort of come, he wouldn't come until we played in a grand final and a winning one, with the Bay. And but in all that time, we were getting sort of different people to talk to him, and Bruce Dool, and I can remember Harry saying to me when Bruce rang Stephen, it was not much said. It'd be hello Stephen, hello Bruce. So it was both. Bruce is so quiet and Stephen so young in those days. But I think the thing that sort of just shows you the quality of the family in those days. If you brought a player over from interstate, you might pay for him to come and put him up, and then they go and speak to everyone else and perhaps sign with someone else. So, I can still hear Harry saying to me, look, we'll pay for his mother and myself and Stephen to come over, and whoever wins his signature can reimburse us. And I said, well, you can't ask for much fairer than that. So in those days, the biggest competition was Melbourne and Essendon and ourselves, and I can remember, we took Stephen and the family out on a Saturday night, and then they're going to meet Melbourne and Essendon, and if I can remember correctly, I don't think Barassi ended up turning. Not saying he didn't turn up, but he didn't come, and Ray Jordan spoke to him. But the hardest opponent was Kevin Sheedy, because Sheeds he'd go to his work and watch him on the floor at the Stock Exchange in Adelaide and things like that. So, but yeah, look, I think just with all the work, that everyone put in at the time, we're lucky enough to get his signature.
What do you think swayed at Carlton's way ahead of Essendon and Sheedy?
I'd like to think that we were perhaps first at him to really. I mean, he could probably answer that better than me, but from what I can remember, I think perhaps we were the first to show interest, and Hopefully, I felt we went about it the right way. Like it was a whole of club approach, and trying to sort of explain. And the club had been pretty successful, over the journey. So, and also, I know Essendon were a good club at the time as well, but we're always on the winners and things like that. So it was good exposure. So I'd like to think it was just the way we went about it.
And of course, Curnan's one that you could easily, as a recruiter, hang your hat on as the great coup of all time. But there were a lot of other great players that you helped get into the club. None more so than the two other players from South Australia that same year, Peter Motley and Craig Bradley.
Yeah.
And of course, John Dorotich from the West. I doubt that we'll ever see a recruiting coup like that ever again.
Well, I think, unfortunately, I'd sort of, gone when we got those players, but I think Ian Collins and Jeff Walsh and Stephen Goff and those sort of people, I mean, you're right, like, that's unheard of these days to, you'd be lucky in the draft to get something like that. You need 3 or 4 picks in a row. But, it was, I can remember going to watch Peter Motley train and, oh, boy, he excited you. As soon as he stepped foot on the ground, the way he went about training, you just knew he was going to be a good player. Just put that sort of effort in. I think, the good thing is, the lucky thing for Carlton at the time, each of those players, they all had a great attitude, trained hard, was prepared to keep working on their game all the time. So just that tragedy with Peter, as we know.
Of course, and then it's incredible in retrospect to think that what Carlton got in was its greatest ever goal kicker, ultimately, the club, and its longest serving player, Craig Bradley.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't have got it more right.
No, exactly. Exactly. And I mean, when you talk to Sheeds, like, he sort of acknowledges, we were the front runners for sticks, but he feels like Colo and all that, snap rattles from underneath him. So it's nice to get one on the Bombers.
Always so. We've talked about the South Australian recruiting coup. I mentioned John Dorotich in WA, but if we cross the Nullarbor to Western Australia, a bit earlier than the Curnan period, Ross Ditchburn, full forward that came to Carlton, premiership player in 1982. You and the then Carlton coach had to travel a fair distance to get to him.
Well, I mean, just going back a little bit, like they had, I just forget why it was, we had a draft. There was, I think we went into Jollymont in the old office there, and, we all sat around a board table, 12 clubs, and we were allowed to select a couple of players. And I can remember talking to Kenny Hunter, and he said, look, we should look at this Ross Ditchburn. He would played at Claremont with him, but he'd gone back to the country and things like that. And I can remember when we put his name out there, everyone sort of looked at me, who's Ross Ditchburn? And so I started to think, oh my gosh, have we done something silly here? But anyway, David and I, spoke to him, and then we jumped on a plane and flew to Perth. And I can remember it was pretty late when we got there, and we got a car and started driving, and Parker's the worst driver in the world, seriously. I think we're about half an hour in, and I said, oh look, do you want to have a drive? And he said yeah. So we pull over, he jumps in and starts driving. Within 5 minutes we hit the gravel, and I said, I'll drive. So I took over, and I think we're coming into a little town called Wagen, and had to put the brakes on quickly, and they were, I think the right word, shunting the trains, the goods trains, and it was just right across the road. Like we sat there for nearly half an hour, and Ditchy's that trip I'll never forget. But when we got to Cookeran, we asked the local little bakery or post office. It was a bit of everything. Where do we go for the Ditchburns? And by the time we got to Ditchy, he knew we were in town anyway, because the local mail. But he come across, and just unfortunately got knocked out so early. But it was a terrific player for us.
And of course, he was, I guess, a seasoned player by the time we got him. He'd played a lot of football for Claremont and played good footy for Claremont, so he was ready to go when you got him into the place.
Yeah, he was, just forget exactly what age he was, but he was certainly a mature player and played good senior footy for Claremont. I think the only reason he went home because of the farm. They're a big farming community, and probably, probably thought his day of ever trying to get to the VFL in those days was probably over, but thanks to Kenny Hunter, it wasn't.
Mm. And of course, he hailed from an area where there were good sportsmen to come out of that region of Western Australia. Mark Bairstow from Geelong was from down that way, and I think Jeff Marsh, the cricketer, hailed from that area of the country.
I think if you, I mean, there's a lot of great footballers and sportsmen from the country areas, but WA seems to have a lot of good. Where Cripper comes from these days, a lot of players come from up that Geraldton way as well. So, it was and footy in Western Australia in those days was huge. Like when I'd go over there, you never really went to the under-19s really because all the good kids were playing senior footy. So, I can always remember you'd land and it was pouring rain. You think, oh, it feels like a wasted day because you're not going to see the best schools. But, we're over there a lot and South Australia. So, and the Blues were, pretty popular, as I said, because of the show The Winners. It was a big thing Sunday afternoons, the hotel sessions that they could watch The Winners on the TV.
So Ditchburn was a member of the 82 team. As you said, he was knocked out early in that game, but nonetheless was a member of that the second leg of the back-to-back premierships. There were two other Western Australian players that featured in both, Peter Bosustow, the late Peter Bosustow, and Ken Hunter, who you've mentioned. Can you talk about getting those two across?
Well, I can remember, we had, I think we might have had to buy a Form 4 off North Melbourne, I think, to get Bosustow.
And just, can you explain what a Form 4 actually was?
Well, in those days, to get an interstate player, each club had 2 Form 4s, but you were allowed, if you hadn't used a Form 4, you could sell it to another club so that, like we end up having 3, but, you'd pay for it to the club.
And they were like stat decks, that if a player from interstate was to play in the VFL, VFL, he would play for the club nominated. Within that 3-year period.
So, so it was. I think it was sort of brought in to stop the drain of, sort of just grabbing anybody and wrecking the Western Australian Footy League, South Australia, whatever. So it was to make sure that you looked after your own area as well. Kenny and Peter Bosustow, what great additions. Like, you talk to Perce Jones and he reckons if he had Hunter and Bosustow, he would have won a premiership in 80. But, I think one of the really good things when David come, I can remember we played a practice match up in Bendigo and against Richmond. And anyway, we got belted this day in the practice match and Richmond looked fantastic, and David's walking off, we're in trouble, we're going to be no good, what have I done, And I said, look, take this the right way, coach, but we'll beat Richmond in the first game. Well, I can't say exactly what he said, but you big-headed Carlton so-and-sos, you're just too full of yourselves. And I said, look, I know these blokes, like practice matches don't count. Anyway, we play Richmond out at Wave in the first game and we won, and Hunter and Bosustow were just outstanding. And I can remember when we were trying to get Kenny's signature, Wes Lofts, I used to spend a lot of time with Wes because he was the godfather, really, of all the decisions in footy, but he had a terrible memory of everyone's names. So I was always dropping Kenny's name so he wouldn't forget who he's talking to. But, I mean, as you said, we, talking about Kernan, Bradley, Motley, Dorridge, I mean, so lucky to get those two. And, Peter was, just unbelievable. And his spirit and his, confidence in himself, really sort of lifted the whole place too. Like, he was very, very confident, but the boys knew what he talked about, he made it happen. And, as we know.
So for all the players that Carlton got into the club, it would be remiss not to ask about the ones that got away. And thinking about that period of time with Bradley, Motley, Kernan, John Platten ended up at Hawthorn, but he was He was on the radar to come here as well that year, wasn't he?
Well, I think if my memory is correct, I think he might have either got a car or cash from us. I think Colo's still trying to get it back, but I think the problem was Kevin Neal was involved with Central Districts and great friend Alan Jeans. So I think he was the one that got Hawthorn involved and got John Moore thinking about playing at Hawthorn rather than coming here. Gosh, imagine if that had happened as well. The Blues would have been on a real roll for a while, and but yeah, it's just one of those ones that you think your club's that good you're going to get everyone, but unfortunately you can't get everyone at all.
I recall asking you recently who the first player actually was that you recruited, and you volunteered the name of Des English. Do you remember the circumstances there, Bendigo boy?
Yeah, such a great area for us, and I can remember, Desi was driving backwards and forwards, and he wouldn't move until he got a senior game, and anyway, when he finally got his first game in the seniors, I remember, after the game saying, Desi, better go home and pack your bags and get to Melbourne, which he did, and has never left, never gone back to that way. But it happened a lot in those days where the country boys, it was in some ways it was nearly harder getting them than the boys from interstate, and yet they're only an hour or two up the road, like Stephen Oliver and some of those guys. They just wouldn't sort of, put themselves out to come down and give it a go. They're real country boys. So yeah,
hard to understand that when, as you say, they're probably an hour and a half, 2 hours drive up the highway.
Yeah. I know. After I'd left here, I know Goffey and Colo and all that nearly wore a car out trying to get Stephen Oliver to come to the club, come back.
Now, you had a period where you basically ran the Footscray Football Club, and then you were part of the fold of Brisbane. Those early years, those pioneering years with the club. Then you returned to Carlton. And, of course, we fast forward to perhaps 1995, a little way. And, again, there's some pivotal figures that were recruited into the club at that time. One player I've marked down is Brad Pearce. David Parkin wasn't convinced with Pearce, but you saw something in him?
Well, I had a fair bit to do with Pearcey getting him to Brisbane in the first place. He was at St Kilda and then played some good footy, and we got him up there, and then he got delisted. And I remember we were having a pre-season pick, and I said to David, I'm really keen to get Brad Pearce to the club, and he said, oh look, I don't know enough about him, and blah blah blah. And we used to train, like the players these days would be horrified. We used to train just on the open fields near the Zoot, and just on the hill there, and to get the boys to do that now, I don't know if they'd be too happy, or the high performance guys wouldn't be. But I can remember we're doing lane work and bits and pieces, and Dave said, I don't know, I don't see much in him, I said, look, I'm telling you, I think he's fit in really well with the team. And the good thing with Pearce, he wasn't a great long runner, but he's quick out of the blocks. And I thought, with playing beside Sticks and those sort of people, he could really be something a bit different. And anyway, he I think David was pretty happy that we got him, because him and Stephen that year were a pretty great combination.
What a glorious kick he was.
Oh, and a long, really good long kick, and probably, had bad patella tendonitis and probably should have played a lot more, but just those days, perhaps, as Pearce, he'd probably agree with me, could have dedicated himself a little bit better. But the great thing is, he's back around the club and keen to come to a lot of the things for the club, which is really good.
And the 1995 Premiership team was marked for so many players that have come to Carlton from within the system.
Yeah.
So one of those players was Earl Spalding, very good player from Melbourne. Was it? Were you jockeying for position with other clubs to get Earl to Carlton?
Well, I can remember I was actually at Brisbane at the time, when Earl was leaving Melbourne. And I can remember going over to Perth and driving an hour or so up north to speak to Dad to try to convince him. But I think Colo's checkbook was a little bit better than ours. But then lucky enough to be back here and seeing Earl play. And I mean, if ever a player from another club really fitted into the system, he did, like, just perfect match with Sticks and all those sort of guys, just, a really, I don't mean knock around bloke, but just a real good person to come into the footy club and sort of, really gel with everyone. But yes, I played 100 games for Carlton, and 95, he was amazing. Like, not the best looking kick, but he made it all work pretty well for himself.
And you think of that team, you think of players like Dean Rice, Matt Clappo, all within the system that came to Carlton just the right time.
Yeah.
Timing's everything, isn't it?
Oh, it is. And, I think Jeff Walsh and that had done such a good job too of the base of the team, and then, adding Pearce and Rice, Clappo and even, Campo. Pretty good that your first year you played in a premiership.